Welcome to EduCasts, home of EduCasters. What is school for? This is arguably the most fundamental and fiercely debated question in education. For much of history, the answers have been relatively conservative. School is a place to pass down the greatest hits of a culture, to instill timeless virtues, or, in more modern terms, to prepare a competent workforce. These philosophies, known as perennialism and essentialism, see the school as a mirror and a preserver of the society that exists. But what if society itself is broken? What if the world outside the classroom is rife with injustice, inequality, and teetering on the edge of disaster? This is the question that gave birth to social Reconstructionism. At its core, social Reconstructionism is a radical and audacious philosophy of education. It argues that the purpose of school is not simply to transmit culture, but to transform it. It believes education should not be a passive reflection of the world, but an active, democratic, and powerful engine for social change. A social Reconstructionist doesn't just ask, how can this student succeed in the world as it is? They ask, how can this student, alongside their community, help fix the world as it is? This philosophy places schools and teachers at the very center of solving society's most pressing problems. Problems like poverty, racism, war, and environmental collapse. It is an activist philosophy, a hopeful one, and, in the eyes of its critics, a dangerous one. It is not a fringe or dusty idea. Its DNA is present in today's most heated debates about critical pedagogy, social justice education, and the very soul of public schooling. To understand American education, you must understand social Reconstructionism, a philosophy that had the audacity to ask, dare the school build a new social order? Social Reconstructionism didn't just appear out of a philosopher's daydream. It was born from crisis. Its roots are firmly planted in the soil of two major American upheavals, the Progressive Era and the Great Depression. First came the progressive movement of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This was a time of massive social strain. Industrialization, urbanization, and mass immigration were creating staggering wealth for a few and brutal conditions for the many. Child labor, deadly factories, and corrupt political machines were the norm. In response, reformers, journalists, and activists pushed for change. In the middle of this was the philosopher John Dewey, the father of progressive education. Dewey argued that traditional schooling was failing. He saw it as a factory model education, students sitting in straight rows, passively receiving dead facts to be memorized, completely disconnected from their real lives. Dewey believed education had to be active, experiential, and social. He argued that the classroom should be a miniature democracy, a place where students learn by doing and by solving problems together. Dewey's progressivism cracked the door open. He said schools should be connected to society and that they should be laboratories for democracy. However, Dewey was more of a gradualist. He believed that if you just created these democratic classrooms, a better, more democratic society would slowly and naturally evolve from them. Then, in 1929, the stock market crashed and the world fell apart. The Great Depression was more than an economic catastrophe. It was a crisis of faith in America's entire social and economic system. Capitalism itself seemed to be failing. Millions were unemployed, bread lines snaked through cities, and families starved while in some cases, farmers destroyed crops they couldn't afford to sell. This was the moment when Dewey's gentle, evolutionary progressivism felt, to some, like a luxury. This is where social Reconstructionism truly ignites. A group of Dewey's own students and colleagues, who became known as the frontier thinkers, looked at the societal collapse and said, "This isn't enough. We don't have time to wait for a better society to evolve. The house is on fire. We need to reconstruct society, and we need to do it now." The undisputed leader of this new, more radical movement was George Counts. In 1932, at the absolute bottom of the Depression, Counts delivered a landmark speech to the Progressive Education Association. He threw down the gauntlet with a title that became the movement's rallying cry, "Dare the school build a new social order?" Counts accused his fellow progressive educators of being timid and lost. He said they were obsessed with romantic notions of the whole child and individual student interests, all while the world outside was collapsing. He argued that all education, whether it admits it or not, is a form of imposition. A capitalist society imposes its values. A communist society imposes its values. The only question is which values we choose to impose. Counts argued that schools must face squarely and courageously every social issue and come to grips with life in all its stark reality. He famously declared that the teachers should deliberately reach for power and then make the most of their conquest is my firm conviction. This was a shocking statement. He wasn't talking about personal power, but the power of the teaching profession, united, to lead the way toward a more just, democratic, and collectivist future. He wanted teachers to stop pretending they were neutral and instead become conscious agents of social change. While Counts provided the fiery manifesto, another educator, Harold Rugg, put the theory into practice. Rugg was a professor at Teachers College, Columbia University, the same intellectual hub as Counts and Dewey. He created one of the first and most successful social studies textbook series in American history, titled Man and His Changing Society. These weren't your typical dry history books. Rugg's textbooks, which sold millions of copies and were used all over the country in the 1930s, were pure social reconstructionism. They were interdisciplinary, mixing history, economics, geography, and civics. Most importantly, they directly addressed the controversial issues Counts talked about. They asked students to critically examine capitalism, class inequality, advertising, and the distribution of wealth. They presented students with real-world data about poverty and industry and asked them, is this fair? Is this working? How could we do this better? Rugg's work was revolutionary and, for a time, wildly popular. He was actively training a generation of students to be critical, not just compliant. This, of course, would later lead to massive pushback, a story that highlights the central challenges of the philosophy. The third key figure was Theodore Bramold, who, writing a bit later in the 1940s and 50s, formally coined the term Reconstructionism. Bramold was deeply influenced by the horrors of World War II and the new, terrifying shadow of the atomic bomb. For him, the need for social reconstruction was no longer just about economics. It was about the very survival of humanity. He argued that technology had outpaced our social and moral development. Bramold crystallized the philosophy by defining it as future-oriented. He believed the curriculum should be built around identifying the major globe-threatening crises of our time, and then, critically, building a consensus around a new, rebuilt vision for the future. He wanted students and teachers to design, in detail, what a peaceful, just, and democratic world order would look like, and then work backward to figure out how to get there. What Reconstructionists actually believe. These thinkers built a philosophy based on a few core interconnected ideas. These are the pillars of social Reconstructionism. 1. The school as a primary agent of social change, not a mirror. This is the central idea that separates Reconstructionism from all other educational philosophies. Essentialists believe schools should teach the basics. Perennialists believe they should teach timeless great books. Even many progressives believe the school's primary focus is the individual child's growth. Reconstructionists reject all of this as insufficient. They see a world in crisis and believe the only institution that can reach everyone and is dedicated to democratic ideals is the public school. Therefore, the school's number one job is to address the crisis. The curriculum is not about a static past. It's about a dynamic and problematic present and a transformed future. The goal is not just to produce a good individual, but to help build a good society. 2. Curriculum must center on real-world, controversial issues. Because the goal is to fix society, the curriculum must be built from society's problems. A Reconstructionist classroom is not a quiet, orderly place of worksheets and lectures about ancient history. It is a buzzing, messy, and sometimes loud laboratory for social analysis. The subjects are not math, English, and history. In their neat little boxes, the subject is, why is there poverty in our city? To answer that, students will need to use math to analyze economic data, English to read reports, interview people, and write proposals, and history to understand how the poverty developed. Other units might be the climate crisis, systemic racism in our justice system, or media literacy and fake news. The key word here is controversial. George Counts was adamant that washing one's hands of controversial topics was an act of cowardice. Reconstructionists believe that avoiding conflict and controversy in school is a terrible disservice. It teaches students that these problems are either not important or too scary to touch, leaving them powerless. By tackling these issues head-on, schools empower students to see themselves as problem solvers.